Welcome to Breaking the Lines Pod. I'm Arland.
My name is Akeem, and this is a Premier League podcast.
Match week 24, man. Done with. How you doing?
Yes, sir. A solid match week, bro. Excited to be here. Go over some of these games, some decent games with some, I would say, better goal scoring this weekend at least.
Yeah. I know last week we said we had a lot of questions going into this weekend, and I think we got some answers, right? But we'll go through it. First up, we had the Brighton Everton game, and both of us actually in the predictions gave it to Brighton. This one was at the same time as the Arsenal game, so I didn't watch it, but I was paying attention to the score because I did have them on a slip that I put in, and I actually had Brighton to win on one of the slips, and it was looking good. And then I checked back the score just to see the full-time score, and of course, Everton equalized in the 90 plus 7. So 1-1 at the Amex there. Not a I don't think it's a surprising result for either one of us, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure we'll get your take on it, but not surprised, just given kind of how the season's gone for both teams. And probably if you weren't watching the game, you would say that a draw would be fair. Looking back at both teams in their season and kind of where they're in the table.
Yeah, like you, I wasn't able to catch this one fully, so I was able to just kind of watch the highlights. But Brian had it. I was same as you, not for the ticket reason, but I had Verbruggen, as you know, and I have him in my fantasy. I was hoping out. I was hoping for the clean sheet on their side, and they almost got it up until the 90 plus 7 minutes there for Beto. Like you said, both teams have been, I wouldn't say solid this season, but they've shown periods of where they can be, solid and threatening forward. So, like you said, a draw from not watching it from the outside probably seems fair, but I wasn't able to watch the game to kind of say who deserved it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, like you said, and kind of like how I stated, I think it seems like a fair result. Obviously, not watching it, kind of difficult to tell. They're fairly close to each other in the league table. Everton's on 34 and Brighton's on 31, so they're a game away, 3 points away from each other. And I think we both suspect that they'll probably finish in and around that area there, from anywhere from eighth down to maybe 13th, 14th. It is worth noting, I think, that Everton has been kind of in a relegation battle the last few years, and I think this year they're definitely a good distance away from it. So I think that that's kind of progress for them. And Brighton, I think we discussed this. I think I might have even asked you this if it wasn't last week, a couple weeks ago. Just are we kind of disappointed in them? But they seem to be having that kind of the same season that they kind of always have, right? They win a couple good games, they go on some good runs, then they drop some points and find themselves kind of in the mid-table there. So that's just kind of keeps happening over and over again. But we can move. We can go on to the Leeds Arsenal game, and I think we both thought that this game would be a little bit more of a struggle for Arsenal. I had them winning 2-1, and you had 1-1, and I watched the game in its entirety, and I don't think it was a 4-0 game watching it. I think there was periods of time in the game where, maybe Leeds were not in control, but, they were making it difficult for Arsenal. And then, I think we get some good goals. Obviously Zubamendi with the cross in, it was a good finish. And then Madueke, the goal directly off the corner kick, which they eventually gave to him. They initially had it down as the own goal, and then Gyökeres and Gabriel Jesus score in the second half, and 4-0. I think this was one of the ones that we had a question going into the match week about, just to kind of see how Arsenal respond to the loss to United. And I think from my perspective, I think I mentioned that this is probably, in terms of the Premier League season, probably one of their most important games, just because City was kind of closing the gap a little bit, and they dropped points, so it's kind of a time that you would expect it to be nervy within the camp and the team. And I think for them to come back and kind of, win 4-0 away to Leeds, a team that's caused a lot of teams trouble in the Premier League this season. I know that they're kind of towards the bottom of the table, but they've given some of the big boys some trouble this season. So I think it was an impressive victory. I think 4-0 away from home after losing last weekend out. I enjoyed not necessarily the performance, but the game I enjoyed One thing I did like about the game is I think the way that we set up more for Victor Gyökeres, um, than we have in the past. I think this is probably the first game where I can say we sort of played to his strengths. We were kind of feeding him a little bit more, in all 3 phases of play, right? So I was impressed by that, but overall, I think, good 3 points, good victory, and we move on.
Yeah, bro. I could agree, bro. I could agree in some sense, like we said last week, in terms of for them now, the biggest rival that Arsenal could have is themselves, as where they stand in the league, and especially after the result after this weekend as well. So what we are saying is just a lot of question on their side from the mental point of view of how they would carry on, especially after the little blip or whatever you'd call it there, them dropping points in their like previous 3 games before this one. So yeah, it was like you said, a lot. One of the questions that we'd asked, and they kind of answered going into the weekend. So the big thing itself just goes back to what I said, kind of that they can only be their only biggest, problem going forward, especially with we've talked about City being kind of just inconsistent and everybody else as well. So it's good for them. And obviously we're recording this late as well. So they were able to get like the victory over us at Chelsea in the League Cup as well too. So it just seems a little bit unlike other season, a little bit different this season. But yeah, time will tell, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you. I think there is a sense of, you have to mature eventually, right? And I think that also it's a bit fortunate on their end, the fact that, I think City's not having the greatest season, 2 seasons back to back, and then obviously Liverpool have their issues, so not really anyone else to kind of be closer to them. I know a lot can happen between now and the end of the season, but, I think that that's kind of, in their favor, but we'll see. Like you said, we'll see. I'm on that same kind of boat with you that I think Arsenal is Arsenal's biggest downfall. They have, I think, all the pieces to go on and finish it from here. But, this is football and you never know kind of what happens. There's been teams that have dropped, a bigger league than what they have currently, at even later stages in the season. So
Oh
we'll
yeah,
see.
100%, bro. I don't think it's something where it's not something to take away credit from them either. It's just the reality of what's going on, for this season, since the start of this season, before all the inconsistency and all of what we've seen from, all the other teams that should be challenging, they did look apart from everyone else. So I know things have kind of fell apart as the season went. So not to like take credit away from them, but like you said, or like we said, they can be their biggest downfall. That's
Yeah.
that's the only way we can see them kind of losing it from here. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. We made an interesting point as well because we touched on it a bit early a couple weeks back with them not playing for the striker in terms of like finding him early enough, trying to feed him as much. So we'll see because those are the margin that's going to help them in the closer game, which is going to be, i.e., like the Champions League, and as they get probably a little bit further in the FA Cup as well, and also with the final for the League Cup. So, it'll be interesting to, like you said, to kind of see how they finish it out.
Yeah, absolutely. We can move on. We can move on to Wolves Bournemouth. Ultimately, Bournemouth coming away with a 2-0 victory away to Wolves. Our predictions, we were kind of tight in the game too. I think that we both thought that it could go, any way. But I think for Bournemouth, at this stage in the season, given this, kind of horrible run they had in the middle of the season, I think it's a good 3 points for them. I mean, I don't think that anyone would have thought that they would get, sucked down in a fight down there. But I think, at this point for them, it's just about finishing as high as they possibly can. We know that they've lost some key players. I mean, coming into the season, they lost 3 of their 4 backline starting positions. So, and then obviously losing Semenyo, who, we've said is probably the best player outside of the top 6 teams when he was at Bournemouth. So, not an easy kind of season for them with losing a lot of their key players, but they started off well. They had a dip and somehow they're still kind of, mid-table, not too far off. To be honest, we're looking at the table and they're 6 points off Liverpool, so not a horrible sort of distance to be. I mean, that's the gap between first and second place in the league. So, and everyone kind of, I think, still considers City to be, a serious challenger as of right now that could potentially overtake them. So, still not a bad, um, I think, position for them to be in and find themselves at this point in the season.
Yeah, I expected this one to be a lot closer. I'm sure we spoke about it a little bit with especially with the just Wolves playing a little bit better, a team that what we would deem probably a bit closer to them in level now they're playing. So I'm not gonna say 2-0 them running away, but I expected like a goal or something to kind of make the game a little bit more interesting from Wolves' side. But like you said, also from Bournemouth's point of view, I think when you put everything into context, they will be happy in terms of losing all those players that we talked about, and still being what we'd say, what, 4.6 points, sorry, behind us and Liverpool in like 40, I believe, and 41, I'm pretty sure. So, and then also, West Ham, which is what, 17th and 20 points. So still a good distance, like you said, still a decent mid-table season for them. And for a club like that, especially after selling all their best players, getting all that money and kind of, I'm not sure if they're going to reinvest it or what they will do. I'm sure they will in that sense, but now they have the chance, at least going into the summer, finishing if they do continue in the way that they're going, probably in like a mid-table position and then reinvest, which is what, those clubs are kind of known for. So I'm sure they'll, with the context of everything that's going on, they'll be kind of happy in terms of where they are. Things have played off for them, especially losing those players.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm just kind of looking back at the stats in this game too, and it was 2-0 for Bournemouth, but you look at the stats, and Wolves had the slight edge on possession, slight edge on expected goals over Bournemouth. 17 shots to Bournemouth's 9, and 7 on target to Bournemouth's 4. So in every kind of key stat there, they outperformed Bournemouth, but just couldn't find the goals, I guess, where Bournemouth could. And I think that's probably the story of Wolves this season,
Yeah, that's
because
kind
I
of
think if
been their Achilles heel this
yeah,
season, I was gonna say.
yeah, I think if you look at their kind of, expected position in the table, which goes based off of the expected goals in the games, they're a lot higher than what they are currently, and this game would've on that expected table, would've added another 3 points for them because they did outperform Bournemouth on the expected goals, so, um, I think it's just one of those seasons where a team I'm not gonna say doesn't deserve to be where they are, but, I will say the few times I've watched Wolves, they're not as bad as you expect them to be. I mean, I think back to that Arsenal game, and, they gave Arsenal a lot of problems in that game, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I think Arsenal was home too. So, it's unfortunate for them to kind of be where they are, but that's the Prem, right? I mean, you don't always get what you deserve.
Yeah, the problem is nowadays is it's competitive as ever, but even more like the boxes mean more than ever, I would say, in my lifetime of watching. I'm not gonna put that emphasis on, soccer's changing or whatever the case might be. But the prem is definitely more like clinical than ever. Because if you're not taking your chances, as we can see, it's a big thing, and football is always like that. But nowadays, more than ever, even if you're playing amazing and you miss a couple chance and you give a chance to the other team that's probably sitting back a little bit, it kind of sets up the game for what the game will be for the rest of whatever minute you have to play. So I think it's just been a little bit unfair. Not unfair, but like we said, a bit tough for Wolves in front of goal. Everywhere else, like I've seen them, I think they're a solid team and missing just those qualities going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can kind of move on from the Wolves Bournemouth game, and we can go to the Chelsea West Ham game. I didn't watch this game, I'll be honest with you. I did watch bits and pieces, but I didn't watch the full game. And I definitely, after West Ham went up 2-0, I definitely didn't watch anything after that. I mean, I kind of was, I'll be honest with you, I was angry because I had Chelsea to win this game on one of my parlays, and I saw them down 2-0, and I was like, there's no way. I was, in disbelief. And sure enough, they come back, and in the second half they get the goals, and they win the game, which I think was a much needed victory for them in terms of the fact that, Liverpool and United won. So to keep kind of pace with that fourth spot, Champions League spot. But it's kind of, I say disappointing in the first half. I know it was kind of back and forth, more of an end-to-end game in the first half than it was in the second. But ultimately, I think good 3 points. I'm sure you watched this one. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say disappointed in the first half. We just weren't there in the first half, mate. And yeah, it's just I think it's the coach learning. Obviously, he's new to the job and less than a month in, and I can understand what he's trying to do. I know there was a lot of fuss in the lineup before when the lineup was announced and stuff and rotating and whatever the case might be. And I can understand what he's trying to do. I think for him, he learned a massive thing on Saturday, which is what all of us that's been watching Chelsea for a while knows that like they do have a solid team. Don't get us wrong. I think they've shown, that they can go up against the best teams of the league or the world, whatever, for 90 minutes or two games and make it competitive at least. But when you go to rotating and starting to change and stuff, as much as how the money they've spent, I think yeah, that's where you find it tricky. So the first half was a deserved first half. It was definitely a game of two halves of where West Ham deserved to be 2-0 up as poor as West Ham has been. I know they've been on a bit of up form in the past couple of games, but as poor as they've been all season, they deservingly were up 2-0 in the first half. I would say the first goal kind of a fluke in terms of shot cross went in, kind of
Mhm.
50-50 in the goalkeeper, the defender, whatever the case might be there. But from the second goal, I'm just not tracking a runner. The players that were out there, not only not tracking their runner, but even going forward, we just didn't offer anything. So the changes at halftime were needed for sure. I think anyone could see that. And then in the second half, we turned it on. I would say they turned it on. They played a lot better. Up the tempo, everything just looked a lot better compared like day and night. Like we said, games of two half pretty much with the first half compared to the second half. So yeah, I think it was an entertaining game. Obviously, the winner came in the 94th minute or 90 plus whatever minute it was. So whenever you get the last minute winner like that, always kind of makes the game enjoyable. So yeah, I think West Ham deserve it in the first half, and I would say Chelsea probably just edged it in the second half there. But yeah, kind of a coach learning his team and learning that he can't rotate no matter. I know it looks a little bit crazy from the outside because we spent over $1 billion, but yeah, we can't. Chelsea is not a football club to rotate or a team at the moment that can rotate in not in every competition, at least, depending on the side that you're playing.
Yeah, and I mean that's I think everyone talks about money, and in some instances I think you kind of have to validate it, but we've seen plenty of examples throughout our time watching this game that money doesn't mean you're getting an outstanding player, or it doesn't mean that you win anything really. I think that we can point out a number of good examples in terms of individual players and team spending as well. So, I think the money thing for me personally, I think that there's some kind of value to it, but I don't necessarily hold teams to it just because, like I said, it's money doesn't bring you success, right? It has to be money that's spent in the right areas and by the right person, right? So I think, when I look at this Chelsea team from the outside and I kind of try to look at it from the neutral perspective, I think they have some good players and we've talked about it in the past. And I think that kind of, regardless of who the manager is, I think that they have some players that would would be able to showcase kind of their worth and their value. And I think that that's kind of how their season has been, right? And I don't know if you agree with me or not. I know obviously you kind of watch them a lot more than I do, but from the outside, it seems like I don't want to say it's not a team that's coached, but it seems like it's a team that there's bits and pieces of individual brilliance with some good players, and I think that they're just they need to get that squad depth number one to be able to rotate, like you said, but also implement some good ideas there. But that's just kind of how it seems from my end, right? And like I said, I mean, I'm sure that somewhere in there I have something completely wrong just because I don't watch them week in and week out like I watch, for example, Arsenal. But I think that they can hurt any team in the Premier League on their day. It's just about having that consistency and kind of building a squad versus maybe just like in a first 11. But I like the idea that or the fact that they were able to be 2-0 down and come back and win 3-2. And I know, maybe some people will say it's West Ham, but being 2-0 down in any game, of I'd say kind of a mentality sort of drainer or a confidence drainer. And the fact that I think that they were able to kind of put their head down and not let it discourage them and kind of slowly chip their way back and eventually win the game. I think that that'll do a lot for the confidence of the players and the manager as well.
100%. And I have to agree with you in terms of the money comment because I'm not making the statement in sense of, that money, put money on everything and it's gonna fix everything. Because, I especially for us, we talk extensively offline and you know how I feel about in terms of the football going nowadays. I think a structure, like you said, having a structure in place, coaching, all those stuff kind of matters. So you have to factor into all of those. But I think for a big club like you said, I think that's the gray area that the opinions kind of because for you, like you said, they're missing a couple players, or I wouldn't even say you. I'm not sure you said a couple players, but at some point or sometimes look like they're not coached. And we're speaking on this. I'm just gonna use one brave example because it's the thing in my head at the moment right now. Like you said, I think going into the West Ham game, coming back from 2-0 down and winning shows obviously incredible strength, and the mental strength that it takes to come back from that is incredible as well. So we have to give them credit. But it's almost like that game against Arsenal on Tuesday, they're going into the game and they're 2-1 down, and or they're 1-0 down, we'll say whatever, one goal behind, and you're going in the game, and I think the setup was okay, whatever they're trying to. But you and I both played soccer. You played in the midfield position. I played probably winger or striker. So mostly getting the ball fed from you, vice versa. And I know if you've seen that game, but like Enzo, which is probably one of our better players as well, and or older player in a more mature player in the squad, he had a couple shots from the outside of the box, and they were fine. Probably one of them were I believe in the first half was one of our one shots on target, or one of the only games only shot on target, right? So when you're looking from the outside perspective, it looks okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like Enzo is trying to take responsibility, blah, blah, blah. But in my sense of I'm watching that game and I'm like, I'm just thinking about you and I, right? Playing in our position back in the day. And I'm like, bro, if we're playing in this game and we're 1-0 down and you're cranking those shots from outside the box when João Pedro, you can probably slip him through to try to get a one-on-one with the keeper, whatever the case, you know what I mean? Like what you're saying in terms of Arsenal playing for Gyökeres this weekend. Those are the moments in games that they kind of need those players to recognize that I think, you know what I mean? It's not just money, because with maturity that will come as well. But spending all that, that's in that situation. Like we need someone to just, you know what I mean? In terms of,
Mhm.
yeah, we can have the couple shots from outside, but there's a couple times we play João Pedro and, give him the chance to go and miss, and then you can argue with each other there. Because, for you and I, especially both the case, you shoot that, you're hearing from me. Or if I'm shooting a miss, I'm hearing from you. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the accountability that they could have, like we said, because we've seen the sign. I think the most frustrating thing is we've seen that they can compete, but in a moment like that, like you just see the maturity difference. You know what I mean? So those are just little things like that. That it's why I mentioned the money, because I don't think that they're gonna slap and get a player that just come and play for João Pedro. But you just need someone in the moment of the game's not going your way. What can you do? Some games you're gonna play, you're not gonna play great. You just need to probably work hard and work for the team and help the team win. And some games you're gonna play and you're the man where everything goes through you. You have to figure out, that comes with maturity. Figure out what kind of game you're having, help the team in the best way you possibly can based on the game, stuff like that. That's what they need a little sprinkle off in that team just to kind of help them in those moments when the game is 2-0 against them or against West Ham. You don't want to wait until halftime. Your coach is giving you information. You want someone on the pitch to just kind of settle you guys down and play. So I think that's in the sense of where I mention it from, and nothing else basically, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's funny. I like that you bring up the Enzo thing from the midweek game because I didn't watch that game, but I was able to catch like maybe 5 minutes at a time at random spells in the game, right? And I know exactly what you're talking about because I was able to catch a couple of those shots, and I was thinking to myself. Once you see the shot from the Arsenal perspective, right? You're like, this is good because this is a reprieve from us, right? Shot goes out, we get the goal kick. So it's almost kind of like a let off, right? So I know exactly what you're talking about from the defensive side of that team, right? So like when I saw those shots, I was like, okay, good. We're done with this phase of attack. And I agree with you. I think that, there's ways that you can kind of push teams back and kind of keep the pressure on them. And I think that that kind of alleviates it. And I 100% agree with you. And then, I think back to the United game and, the Dorgu shot from outside the box, that was a wild, kind of hit. And then the same thing with the Cunha one. And it's like, those go in and you win the game and all of a sudden you're praised for, you know, how you play the game because you are able to hit those two shots in. So I think it's a funny game. I think it's a funny old game. This game is just because, it's, you don't shoot, you don't score. I think everyone kind of, would use that phrase at one point while watching any game. But at the same time, it's like you want to be able to kind of take, I guess, maybe smarter shots, or I don't even know what to say, to be honest, to that point.
Just maximize the effort, like you said.
Exactly.
I 100% understand, and I think we have to kind of flip the book back to Arsenal. We talk about Arsenal this season, and you know my feeling on what I've said. I think I saw. I don't know if you've seen the Dan Burn interview that's floating around today in terms of like where Raya is. That's a trigger for where Arsenal's corner was sometimes last season. And I've
Mhm.
always I've said that to you, like watching Arsenal, I don't know everything that they're doing, but you can tell that it's structured in every single way. And you made a great point as well. And I think that's a good thing of having the pod because, we both kind of pick each other brain because you don't shoot, you don't score. So you can look like a genius, like you said, Enzo scored that goal and he's a genius. So I'm just looking at it from hindsight, and hindsight's always 2020. So I think it's a good point as well. I think the only thing I'm trying to, I guess, compare it to as if we're going to look every season, we kind of have a benchmark. And I would say this season, the benchmark is Arsenal. And it's just the way that they've been going about stuff in the past couple of years. But I think also when you go about it in that sense, they've also in the past couple weeks and couple months received fairly some criticism. So I don't know. Like you said, I think you made a great point there, and it made me start thinking like you don't shoot, you don't score, which is very obvious and evident. But no, it's a funny game, like we said. We would be sitting here if Enzo scored and probably be talking about the brilliant goal. So I guess we give it to him. But I think those maturity obviously helps in football because Arsenal is showing that.
And I like the control side of aspect of it too that you mentioned because I remember I was scrolling through Twitter yesterday and I was able to catch an interview of Declan Rice after the game, after the Chelsea game and the Carabao Cup, and he said something that I think not a lot of people will pay attention to or kind of really give any thought, but he said that Mikel Arteta has control of this club from the very top to the very bottom, and I think to build something that, and obviously I'm not singing Arteta's praises in terms of he hasn't really won anything that's meaningful, right? But I think to get a team to the point where they can compete in all fronts and actually kind of have a chance to possibly win things, I think you need to have, you know, that sort of structure, and I know we've seen it in seasons before where maybe that's not the case, but I think the way that this game is moving forward, I think if you do not give, a manager kind of control of every aspect, it's gonna end, either them walking away or you kind of letting them go because of the fact that something's not going to work. Like, and I think the prime example and the most recent example probably would be, obviously Enzo and Ruben Amorim. I mean, I think those are great examples of where, you don't necessarily give the manager the power that they are requesting, and eventually that relationship will break down. So I think that's a good aspect too, and that kind of is interesting to me to see where these teams are going. More so I think for the Chelsea aspect for me because of the fact that they appointed Liam in this new position. I don't know what the contract that they gave him is, but I think it's a long-term one, right? So I'm interested to see kind of what control they give him at the club. Obviously on United's end, I mean, Carrick is kind of like an interim manager, so, there's no desire there for control or anything like that. But I'm interested to see kind of what happens with Chelsea, just because, obviously, appointing a manager mid-season, and we've discussed about the manager situation there, plenty, but I think that's an interesting kind of thing for me to see at least. But we can move on. We still have a lot to go through. Chelsea pick up the 3 points. West Ham, I think, showed some heart in the first half, but ultimately, I think the quality of Chelsea kind of, just came out a little bit in that second half. Another big game that we kind of, I think, we were debating in the predictions how we were going to go was the Liverpool Newcastle game, and I don't think either one of us would have thought 4-1.
Yeah, this one, and it started tight as well, mate.
Yeah, absolutely, it did.
It started close with obviously Newcastle taking the lead through Gordon there. I mean, right after him getting his traditional yellow card for just running around like that. And I'm like, man, I don't get why. I get the high press, but you clearly know the ball is not going to be there. I don't know why. I don't know. Hey, listen. But yeah, after his yellow card, getting a nice goal as well, far post on the ground there, beating Allison, and then I literally sent it in the group chat. I was just like, there's, I watch the Prem enough to kind of give my honest take on other players, and there's one player we missed out on this summer that I think is a superstar, and it's that Hugo Kitike player, mate. I think he just took over, which is funny. Like watching that game, those two goals that he scored like right after back to back, he missed, which what I think was his easiest chance after that, because the second goal, I don't know if you're able to catch it, but that one is very, very, the way he scored, it's so difficult, bro. It's like outside the
Hmm.
boot right there in the case, but you just know running at that pace and kind of, having the control, like the calmness that he had to just slide it into the far post was insane. So yeah, I think Liverpool after, the going down behind ultimately deserved it. And yeah, it was a good victory for them. It kind of looked the same problem we've been saying with Newcastle. Like they didn't look too bad, but once they conceded a goal, things just kind of fall apart for them. And then, yeah, Kings got a little bit out of hand. So I would say a deserve for Liverpool on the day. Getting Konate, I know he's been having a tough time recently. So it was good. I was able to watch his goal entirely. And also my biggest takeaway, well, not my takeaway, but I remember even being from the outside, just being very happy for Konate. I saw him crying as well. And yeah, I was just happy for the lad, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Definitely, I think when you go through something like that, and to be able to kind of play through it and see the player's emotion, I think it reminds you that, rivalries aside and whatnot, we're all human and we kind of all go through the same thing. So I think it's tough seeing something like that. But I absolutely agree with you on the Hugo Ekitike. I think I find myself every single weekend watching this guy and saying to whoever I'm watching the game with, I don't know why we didn't sign this guy. I mean, you watch him, and I think he's a striker that has the complete package. I mean, has the finishing, has the dribbling, has the ability to create chances for himself, good in tight areas, mobile, versatile. I think can probably play off the wing too, can kind of move horizontally and laterally with the ball too. Absolutely complete package. And I don't remember the summer that well, but I don't think that there was like many teams that were really pushing Liverpool for a signature. I know that there was some rumors, but
It
and I
was
could be
him.
wrong.
It was before we got draw. It was, I think if we didn't draw wasn't on our list. So it was between him and I believe we were trying to get the lap as well. And I know it was a serious thing with Chelsea for sure. But yeah, the price tag also kind of
Yeah.
held us back because we weren't, I don't know why we spent so much as well on other players. But yeah, I think it was definitely that. And then also obviously with Newcastle, he was close to Newcastle as well in that sense. But then, when a bigger team obviously comes. But I believe that if I don't know, like you said, I don't think that there was any other big teams in terms of, top six team rival in Liverpool like that, like they were going for it. Because I don't think it
Mhm.
was, battle. So, good, a great player though. I think for before he came, I would say I was kind of skeptical because I didn't know too much of him. But like you said, seeing him play, definitely a superstar. And
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
also have to think that they have Isak as well to come back, another player with the complete package. It'd just be interesting to kind of see what happens if they ever kind of hit the ground running together because we know the problems that they've had start of season. So let's see.
Yeah, yeah, let's see. But I think good 3 points for Liverpool. Newcastle's been kind of up and down this season, but still an impressive victory. Moving on the list here to Sunday, Villa Brentford. This was one that I think you predicted this one spot on. You gave it 1-0 to Brentford, and I didn't watch this game, but I was kind of looking at the scores periodically, and I saw that Brentford got the red card with Sade, and I was like, oh, Villa's definitely gonna kind of take over this game, and I was like, I definitely see them winning, and sure enough, a few minutes after the red card, Brentford scored, and were able to keep Villa out from scoring all the rest of the game and get the 3 points.
Yes, sir. I mean, for us now, I don't want to get sucked into that hope again, but yeah, I was watching, hoping, just like my prediction that Villa would lose, kind of like a hate watch. Or not even hate watch, I would say, because I've explained it to you that I mean, last week we did say, and I did say, you kind of just have to give them the eye and keep an eye on them and to see what they're doing. but I've made it very clear that I didn't think that they were going to win the league because of this, and they're not expected to. If they did were to win the league, it would have been massive credit, and I would have been the first one there, cheering them on and being happy for them. But just because of moments like this, they're doing well so far. The league is kind of, like we said, more competitive than ever. So getting, especially the streak that they were on, that win streak, it kind of, pushed them up into the high position that they were in and that they're still in. And they're having also a decent season, so we can't be too critical of that. But I think as the season kind of goes or comes to an end, they'll taper off a bit because of not that they don't have the players for it, but it's at the end of the day, it's Aston Villa and just a squad. I don't think with all the competition, other competition that they have to focus on. I don't know if they have that squad to kind of get running. So I expect these up and down results, and Brentford is also a good team, so we can't take that away from them with the season that they're having as well.
And I don't know if this is kind of the start of that taper that we've been mentioning for the last couple weeks. I think it's definitely kind of a failure for them. I mean, you're home playing 10 men for, half of the game at least, and to not be able to kind of, win the game, I think is a tough one. I think the only other time that we've seen this season is the United and Everton game, which is kind of this similar context. But I think that Villa and United this season so far have been on two different levels. So interesting that that was the case there. Obviously, I think I was looking at this result, and I know we've discussed Villa and kind of their distance from Arsenal. After the game, I was a little bit upset because I don't remember what I had for this game, but in the parlay, but I know that this didn't formulate the way I thought it would, and I had Villa winning this game, so in our predictions 1-0. But it was kind of like a happy sad moment because obviously I was happy that they dropped points, but upset about the predictions. But moving on to the United Fulham game, United winning 3-2, and this was an exciting game towards the end. I mean, it's where all the action sort of was. United went up 2-0, and they had a penalty canceled, which I don't know if you watched this game, but they had a penalty canceled, and
They
instead they gave a
scored from
free
the
kick.
free kick. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I think Marco Silva was complaining about that after the game, and I'm not sure if I feel like we've seen that before. I feel like that's normal for VAR to be like, it's not a penalty, but it's a free kick because it's outside the box or whatever it is.
I've seen that in the Club World Cup. That's where I remember seeing that where they gave a corner kick because it wasn't a penalty.
Yeah, which I feel like that should be normal.
I agree because I think sometimes they do, and I think that was I remember that was a big talk last season in terms of you'd cancel the penalty kick or whatever sometimes, and it's like the dude kicked the ball out of the other team and it's supposed to be a corner, but now it's because it's a canceled penalty kick, it's almost their ball, and like you said, that
Yeah,
phase of attack is completely killed. So
yeah.
I do agree. I don't know where you would complain because I think even as a manager, that could be beneficial for you because if you don't get a penalty, at least you'll get something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I feel like I've seen both instances happen this season, if I'm being honest. I think I've seen definitely both instances happen where they review it, it's not a penalty, and the defensive team gets the ball, and you're like, why do they get the ball if it's not a penalty? Why doesn't the play continue or the phase continue where it's like if the ball goes out for a corner, why do they not get the corner kick? Because it doesn't make sense to me. But so I didn't really have anything to really kind of find at fault there. And like you mentioned, Casemiro scored off of that free kick that was awarded, and then Cunha scored again in the second half, and Fulham had a goal ruled offside in the second half, which I thought was sort of fishy, if I'm being honest. Thought it was very, very tight, and to me, I want to say it looked like it was onside to me, if I'm being honest, but it was ruled off.
I actually missed that. I didn't. I'm gonna have to find a highlight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I had United to win this game, so, I wasn't too mad at that in terms of that, but in terms of, like, if we're looking at the refereeing and in the game, I thought it was onside. But definitely take a look at it and let me know what you think because I think this was an interesting one. And then Raul Jimenez gets a penalty, um in the 85th minute, which I thought was kind of a questionable call. I wouldn't have been upset if it wasn't given a penalty, and honestly, I was leaning more towards the not penalty just because he gets his shot away, and it's not there's not like insane contact. Like we've seen a lot of times this season where in the box you get your shot away and you have minimal contact, but the player goes down or whatever, and it's nothing is given. So this was like the first time this season I've seen this type of penalty awarded, which I can't even say I was shocked, but for me at least, I think that it's iffy. If it is a penalty, then I'd like to see it every single time given that way because we've seen the same situation multiple times. But
I think that's the biggest problem though, just before we even move on, but it's just the inconsistency of what we see every week. Sometimes it's a penalty, sometimes it's not. Yeah, it happens.
yeah, yeah, and I honestly don't think that that's going to change regardless of what happens. I don't think that there's any sort of implementation
Well,
of or
I don't think it will change because of the human interpretation of it.
yeah,
And
that too.
like you just said, it's just human interpretation. Like for you and I, what we think is a foul. I think for me, what I don't get is, and I'm still struggling to understand if it's a foul anywhere else on the pitch, why is it not a foul in the box? That's my biggest thing because if you watch, I watch the Arsenal game. Well, you missed the Arsenal game, but there was a lot, I would say, from both teams, a lot of little technical fouls in that game yesterday. And it's like, they wouldn't call that in the box. So
Yeah,
it's just like, I don't know. I'm trying to, so you want us to understand that as well. But you know what I mean? It's just confusing because yeah, you trip a player going forward, like, just to slow the game down, whatever, take a yellow card. But in the box, you go, you kick and you miss and you hit the player and your intention was to kick. Well, you hit the player, it's not a foul because your intention, but it's still a foul. You know what I mean? If it's
yeah,
outside and this player is breaking away, you're stopping the play and you're giving the player a yellow card. So, like we said, human interpretation, it's not for us to sit here. We'd have a whole 2 hour
yeah.
podcast.
I'm sure of it. But we'll go back into the Fulham game. Fulham equalized in the first minute of added time, and I thought to myself, United looked comfortable in this game in the first half, and they were winning 2-0, and they just slipped it up, and I was like, wow. I was like, impressive result for them last weekend. They come, obviously they come back home and they're winning comfortably and they throw it away. And I was like, same old United. And few minutes after, it's almost like, you couldn't have written a better kind of storyline for it. Benjamin Sesko scores from a Bruno assist, and United kind of get bailed out there at the end. But I think it showed, I think we obviously had some questions on United's side last weekend in terms of, they had two good results to, two kind of rivals of theirs. And we were kind of interested to see how they fared with, with all due respect to those teams, but the sort of lesser teams or the teams outside of those top six positions. And I think this was one of the games that gave us an answer, but also, kind of didn't give us an answer too, because, they played well and I thought that they were good kind of money for their lead. I thought that they deserved the 2-0 lead in the first half, and then kind of second half comes around and they just they have some sloppy moments where it's like you sort of fall asleep. And I think part of that is kind of, the fact that they start making changes and, as done that I think both you and I think that Casemiro is in terms of this level of football. I think that when United bring on Ugarte, I think that that level drops in the midfield tremendously. And I think that that kind of has something to do with it too, is the fact that, I know we were talking about Chelsea in the depth, but I think that United have absolutely no depth in any position to really look at. So good, I'd say, obviously good 3 points for them to kind of keep pace with that top four race, but some warning signs there. And I'm honestly shocked that they didn't go and try and get something for that midfield. Maybe not like a long-term replacement, but at least something to kind of, just give them more numbers in that midfield in this January transfer window.
Yeah, I'm happy for them as well. I think the feel good factor is back. Like you said, going 2-0 up. I know the sloppiness kind of allowed Fulham to get back into the game, but getting that Bruno assist to Sesko in the end there, I know must have felt well and was a really good goal as well. So yeah, I'm happy for them. Obviously, I predicted the 1-1, I guess, out of hope in terms of just for that top four battle that we have in between us and them and Liverpool at the moment. But yeah, I know from all the Man U fans that are in my surrounding and my friends and stuff, and watching the game as well, that it was obviously it's been improved since the second and since Carrick has came in. So yeah, I'm just happy for them to keep obviously punching away. Like you said, I think their big Achilles heel going forward will be struggling to those little teams that we say, those lesser teams, no disrespect, but also, as you just mentioned, rightfully so, that just the squad depth. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how they deal with the other games. I know the field with factor is back, but like we said, that squad depth will kind of catch up to them in a couple games. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how they also get over that hurdle.
Yeah, and one thing they have on their side is they only have, what, 13 Premier League games left or 14? And
Yeah.
that's all the games that they have, so I think that that kind of is on their side, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that they didn't go and
Could have
bring in
just said
anybody.
13 games left, bro.
Man, but we'll see how they kind of how they keep moving. It's gonna be an interesting prediction with the Spurs game this weekend for them. But we'll move on to the Forest Palace game. And I was watching the United game, so you know, obviously this game I didn't really watch. But I think that this is probably another one of those like the Brighton Fulham game that we or not the Brighton Fulham, the Brighton Everton game that we were sort of saying that, you know, based off of these teams and their seasons, we feel like just by looking at the result, it seems like a fair result. And to be honest, I think this is another one for me. I know that, you know, Forrest played sort of half the game with 10 men, but it's, I think, probably, you know, given sort of these two teams, and like I said, obviously not watching the game, so I could be completely wrong in context of the game, but in context of their seasons, I think probably a fair result for both teams, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it was more on Palace's side, obviously for Forest, like you said, playing most of the game with 10 men is definitely they're gonna be forced along with who's the man in charge there. They're gonna be forced to just drop back into that kind of defensive shape that they kind of played most of that game for. But like we mentioned with Palace just not being able to, along with Villa, not being able to kind of break that 10-man down Forest there and kind of get the win. And it's kind of the touchback, I wouldn't say on their entire season, but mostly in their most recent part in the past, what, 6 or 7 match weeks where they're struggling to find goals. It was evident. So yeah, I think I'm more obviously, with Palace pushing forward, I think Forest had some of the chances from what I could see, some chances that they could kind of, a snatch and grab kind of game. But yeah, I think Forest would kind of be obviously more disappointed, especially going up against 10 men.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting because, you know, Palace brought in some players over this January period. I mean, they brought in Brennan Johnson from Spurs, right? They brought in guess Gusan. I don't know if that's how you say his name from Villa, and then you know they ended up with Strand Larson from Wolves. They definitely brought in some firepower, and then you know they managed to keep Mateta too. I think that you know ended up failing
Managed.
one of his.
Mate, they try to ship my brother off with a 3-month injury.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I mean,
They are
I
ruthless, bro.
he, brother, he didn't seem like he was injured, banging all these goals in. I mean, I don't know what happened there, but they brought in Strand Larson, so I mean, you know,
Has to
I
be
think that
something behind it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that you know, I'm sure that once that they realized that that move for Mateta was dropping. I don't know if maybe it was too late to pull out for Strand Larson or whatever, but it's gonna be interesting to see kind of how he fits into that team because you know I don't think he's a bad striker. You know I think that he has you know some of the qualities to be successful, just you know given the
Yeah,
right
I actually
opportunity.
think he'll
So
be. I actually think he'll be good in there. I think from what
yeah,
we known from that Wolves of last year, a physical player, very similar to Mateta. Mateta wasn't, we're not going to disrespect Mateta and say that he wasn't a good player, but more of a physical present, can score headers, can score on the ground. Very. Yeah, I think a strong player will play definitely to their strength. I would think so. I don't see why he wouldn't succeed. Let's see.
yeah. All right, well that brings us to the last game on Sunday, Spurs City. 2-2 draw. I want to say I didn't see this coming. I know our predictions, you know, we both gave it to City. I think I had 2-1 and you had 3-1. And to be honest, I watched the first, I want to say maybe like 20 or so minutes of this game. And, you know, I was able to see the Ryan Cherokee goal where I think Basuma maybe lost it in the midfield, and you know I think Cherokee still had a lot to do. The finish was a good finish. You know, being able to beat Vicario out from kind of the distance and the angle that he beat him out was impressive. But that's all I watched of this game. I didn't watch the rest of it. And interesting enough, I was actually you know kind of out and about on Sunday, and my brother-in-law was with me, and you know he just kind of looked at the score. I wasn't even looking at the score, to be honest, and I knew that City was up 2-0, and he was like, "City's 2-2," and I was like, "There's no way," because based off that first half, I didn't see anything from Spurs in the first half, in terms of like the 25 minutes that I watched, right? I was like, yeah, I was like, there's no chance Spurs get anything out of this. And sure enough, they ended up picking up a point.
I think it was the same as you watching the game. I think a great goal, I would say as well. Kind of a little sloppiness from Spurs in the midfield there, but I think a good goal to kind of just arrow it into the corner there. I think a good sign in Turkey's been for them because you know how sometimes it typically take those players like a year or so to get settled, especially him and Semenyo under Pep. So they look a little bit, like the stars at the moment. And like as you as well watching that game, I was able to watch it in the full game, and I didn't see Spurs getting anything as well from the game. But I think the second half just goes back to the kind of the City that we talked about that we've kind of seen this season, why we're a little bit worried about the challenge or them challenging for the title consistently. Because they've shown not just in that game, but they've shown in previous games that defensively they struggle a bit, I would say, not just defensively, but also we can see now with what we probably his longest drought for Erling Haaland going forward. They're struggling to kind of create and beat those teams as normal as or as natural as they normally would. So yeah, I think it's just the kind of the City that we've seen so far this season. A better Tottenham. They couldn't be any worse than they were in the first half, in the second. So an improved Tottenham, and also you give them credit. They were missing a couple players, and teams missing their best players are always gonna, deplete a bit. So you have to give them credit getting up, especially their striker back. He would showed why they've been missing him for so long. So let's see. It'll be interesting because we know how poor of a run Spurs have been on. So we'll be interesting to see them, especially this weekend in the big game against Manchester United, what they bring going forward. And also City now, just how they recover, because I don't think they're gonna go on a run. Like we've kind of said that on the pod. We don't think that this is a City where they're gonna go 14, 15 games or whatever the rest of the games unbeaten for the rest of the season. So it'll kind of be just interesting to see what happened in that top four, top six race as the season kind of comes to an end.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think it's gonna be interesting. I think, from my perspective, I think, I'm still kind of keeping an eye on them, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how they finish the season. I think this Carabao Cup final now becomes like an interesting game too. So we'll see how that pans out. And that game could also kind of maybe affect the Premier League a little bit too, right? So we'll see how that kind of materializes. But ultimately, I think from the Arsenal perspective, I mean, I think it was a good weekend given that City dropped points and obviously Villa did too. Get that distance back up to 6 points. So a good weekend. I'm interested in to see kind of how Spurs, and I feel like I say this every weekend, but I feel like I'm interested to see how Spurs finish the season because, like you said, they've been up and down, and we've kind of, we've seen sort of their very, very low points. And I'm interested to see some of their high points because I don't feel like they've had any this season, right? And I think that, they definitely have to have some at some point in the season. But before the game, I think this is another thing that kind of really just set me in City's direction was the fact that I think I read that they only had like 12 first team players available. So like you mentioned, a lot of players missing. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, I mean, City's probably gonna run away with this game, and sure enough, credit to Spurs. Like you said, they kind of were able to come back in the second half and steal a point, and I'm sure their fans were kind of having mixed feelings about that. But in terms of the team and the squad, I think that it's a great point for them. But yeah, we'll move on, and then we'll see kind of how they go on.
Yeah, I guess we just have to leave it up to them now and see kind of both teams of how they finish out the season,
Yeah.
and what their goals are.
Absolutely. Monday, Premier League action. I feel like we haven't had Monday, or we have had Monday. I don't know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about, but
yeah, that's what I'm saying. We had Monday for the past couple Mondays.
maybe I haven't watched a Monday
Yeah,
in a
they've been a
while.
little bit boring, I would say, the other games, where this one was at
Yeah.
least goals.
But Sunderland kind of come back after that loss last week, and they win 3-0 at home comfortably to Burnley, and obviously Sunderland and Burnley are in two different kind of areas of the table, and I think that we said it might be sort of it might be a tricky one because of the fact that they're like promoted teams or whatever, but seems like it was a comfortable victory. 3-0, no Jaka for them. I think he's out for a little while with an injury, and I think that they're still able to kind of get 3 goals, 3 points, and kind of move along the table. Still kind of in that mid-table, 8th place, level on points with Brentford, who, interesting enough, I think I mentioned last week, they're both kind of our shocks of the season. Brentford and Sunderland, they both lost last week, and they both come back this week and get victories. So I think good victory overall for Sunderland.
Yeah, my boys are like a minor setback for a major comeback, maybe. But yeah, I think for both of them, obviously having just like what we'd say probably a blip last week. I mean, and it's probably not even a blip. It with this squad and with the teams that they are, it's kind of expected. I'm not gonna say that they're overachieving. I'd leave that up to them. But I guess from the outside, we would kind of put it in as that category, with what they've been doing this season. So yeah, I think both of them kind of coming back in the victory this week. Obviously, they're both going to be in the Premier League next season. For Sunderland, I would think that's probably more of an achievement than Brentford, but still, especially like what we've given the context of both teams, what Brentford has lost, Sunderland being newly promoted, I think they both would be happy. And Sunderland also getting the win against what we would think against a tricky Burnley, because I think, playing in the same league last season can do, I guess, what we've seen, one or two things kind of make the games either easier or you guys understand your opponents more and you get to kind of execute a better game plan. I guess that's just what happened on the day. But yeah, just kind of a good performance, I guess, from Sunderland, but not something surprising that we've seen. I guess just with how defensively tight Burnley has kept some of the big teams. For Sunderland to score three, you kind of have to give them their credit.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That kind of rounds off match week 24. It was an interesting match week. A match week of 3 red cards, which it seems like in the Premier League, the red cards come kind of in batches for the weekends. But I think it's a difficult week to kind of pick a team of the week. I mean, we had like Chelsea, for example, coming back from the 2 goal deficit to win the game. Even Spurs, I think, the fact that they were 2-0 down, come back. Sunderland coming back to win 3-0. Even Brentford, winning away to Villa with 10 men. Arsenal winning 4-0 away to Leeds. Like I think there's a lot of teams that have kind of a shout for the team of the week for us. What are you thinking?
I'm giving mine to Brentford.
Okay, I can agree with that. I think it's very impressive the fact that given Villa's season so far, the 10 men for half the game, and you're able to hold on and win 1-0, especially after losing last week, I think is impressive, and I agree with you. I vote
Yeah,
for them as well.
it has to be Brentford.
All right. Well, that rounds off the match week. It was an exciting match week, I think, overall. A lot of exciting games, and hopefully the next one is exactly like that. You ready for the predictions?
Yes, sir. Bring them on. That's why we're here.
All right, let's do it. First up, actually a Friday game. I didn't even realize this was a Friday game. Leeds Forest. What are we thinking?
Tricky, tricky. I'm gonna go 2-1 Forest.
All right. I'm gonna go for a 1-1. I think we've had a few 1-1s in the last couple weeks, and I just feel like this is probably one of the ones that could possibly be 1-1 as well. Honestly, I have no idea which way it's gonna go. Saturday morning, 7:30 sharp. It's good that we have I like the 7:30 Saturday games. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like when it starts at 10 o'clock, mate. I don't know what they're doing with those. They need that or 7:30 back, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, man. United Spurs, tough game. What are we thinking? I think personally, this is the most obvious 2-2 prediction. Not saying that it'll finish 2-2, but I think it's like the most obvious game that you could possibly predict 2-2 on.
I'm gonna go with United repeating the same result they got against Fulham, 3-2.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna go 2-2. I'm just
Okay.
I know that it's probably not going to happen, most likely not, but I just can't send it either way, to be honest.
Makes
Bournemouth
sense.
Villa, yeah. Bournemouth Villa, interesting game.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Villa will Bournemouth do a job here. I'm gonna go for I'll go 2-1 Bournemouth at house.
Okay. I like that result, actually. I like that. I'm gonna copy you on that. 2-1 Bournemouth. I like that. Arsenal Sunderland. What are you thinking?
This is at the Emirates. I think Sunderland will make it tough, but I think Arsenal will find a way. I don't think they will keep a clean sheet. I'm gonna go. Let me go 3-1 Arsenal.
3-1? Okay. I like that result. For some reason, 2-0 just crossed my mind, so I'm just gonna go with 2-0. but I'm
Healthy
excited.
now.
I'm excited to watch the game. I think after drawing at Sunderland, I think this makes it exciting for me to kind of see how Mikel Arteta kind of decides to set up the team to kind of, I guess not let what happened at the Stadium of Light happen at the Emirates. One thing I hope is, Saka is fit for this. I know we didn't discuss this in our game sort of analysis, but he was supposed to start against Leeds, and I think in the warm-ups he pulled up with some sort of muscular injury. So I hope he's back. Don't know what the status on him is going to be, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be back, mate.
Yeah, I mean, muscular.
That's a muscle injury, bro, and that's like a week. I don't think he'll be fit to start.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I don't. I think Madueke has not been doing bad, kind of in his spot when he kind of comes in for him. So it's not the end of the world, right? I think that you should be more than equipped to kind of handle that. Next up, Burnley West Ham. This one is an interesting one, and this one I think is, I don't think that it's going to change sort of the bottom there, but I think that it could for Burnley if they win this game, I think it could kind of kickstart I want to say kind of maybe like a revival or maybe like a run for them. So I don't know. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think this one will be edgy for sure. They're not going to be an open game, or it could be, but I think both teams are going to be, like you said, 5 points behind for Burnley. They could cut it down to two with this win. West Ham coming off for losing, that 2-0 lead that they had against Chelsea a week ago. I'm sure that's going to be on their mind, but I think it's be interesting, mate, because Burnley just lost 3-0. So I don't know. I'll go 1-1. It's difficult.
Okay, I like that. I'm stuck between 2-2 and 2-1 to West Ham. I'm gonna give it 2-1 to West Ham though. I think West Ham will get 2 goals and yeah, I could see Burnley getting two, but I'm gonna go with them getting one. Fulham Everton. This is the most sort of, I'd say, obvious for me, just kind of staring me in the eyes, a 0-0 draw for some reason.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think I saw that Drewsby Hall is back for Everton.
Okay.
Wilson's been playing well, so I think it will kind of be. I don't know. I'm gonna go for it's a tricky one to call. Every time I go against Everton, they win. So I'm gonna go. I don't know. I'm gonna go 2-1. I'll go 2-1 Everton.
All right. I like that. I want to stick with 0-0. I think I'm gonna stick with 0-0. I think I'm gonna
Yeah.
stick with 0-0. All right, Wolves Chelsea. What are you thinking on this one? I think Chelsea wins, but what are you thinking in terms of the score?
Think we win as well. I'm gonna go 2-0 Chelsea. Hopefully,
Okay, I'm gonna go 4-0 Chelsea.
if we keep a clean sheet.
Yeah, I think I know that we were talking a little bit about the Carabao Cup game, and I know that they obviously lost the game, but I like the way that they kind of managed the game at certain times, and I know that kind of it was on them to take the game to Arsenal, but I like Chelsea's attack. I think that they have some good players in the attack, and I think in games like this, those players find ways to score. Newcastle Brentford next up, another interesting and tough one to kind of call. I want to go. I honestly want to go like 2-0 Brentford, but I feel like every time I go against Newcastle, they win. They're my Everton, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I'm gonna go 2-1 Brentford.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think I'll go the other way, 2-1 Newcastle.
I like when we do that. When we go one way, one the other way, I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. Brighton Palace Sunday, 2 games on Sunday. This obviously being kind of the smaller of the two. What are you thinking?
Hey, wow, I'm looking at these. Sorry, I'm looking at the fixture, and you saying that just brought me and me realize that it's Liverpool Man City. But I guess it's because it doesn't have that feel around it, like the
Yeah.
previous season. That's probably why I didn't know that they're playing this weekend. Brighton Palace, let's go. I'll go 1-0 Brighton.
Okay. I'm gonna go 1-1 on this one too. I think Brighton and Palace both drew 1-1 last week, so it'll be interesting to see if they do the same again this week. Last one, Liverpool City, man. I know we said it doesn't have the same hype, but both teams kind of fighting for two different things at this point in the season. I think it's an important game for both teams. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's definitely important for both teams. I think probably a little bit more important for City given the context of what they're fighting for in their season. But yeah, I think they've just shown last week against Tottenham what can happen also when that happens. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to kind of call because I think City could win. They won the previous fixture, obviously 3-0, so we should be going in that sense. But Liverpool's been finding form recently, so I don't know. It's at City, so I'll go
Or is that Liverpool?
to Liverpool.
Yeah,
Sorry,
at Anfield.
at Anfield. I'm gonna go. I'll go to 1 Liverpool.
I like that score line. I honestly was between 3 score lines. I was between, and it's funny because they're all different kind of end results, but I was between 2-1 Liverpool, like you said, 2-2 and 3-2 City. And I'm just gonna go down the middle and go 2-2.
Yeah, I could see it
Um,
being, a tough game, but I don't know. Let's see.
yeah, I definitely see both teams scoring in this. If you're putting in a parlay, I think both teams to score is a safe bet on this game. Well, that kind of concludes it, man. That wraps it up. Match week 24, and then kind of looking ahead into match week 25. Should be another thrilling match week in the Prem.
Yes, sir. Some good games as well. Some really good games. United, Tottenham, City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Sunderland will be tough for them. Wolves always give people a tough game for the Chelsea. And then, like we mentioned with United going for the top four, like they are at the moment, it would be interesting to kind of see how they fare this weekend. Would be what, 4 wins? Almost close to that dude's cutting his hair, right?
Yeah, I honestly I don't know who United play next, but I hope for his sake, man, United win this one and the next one.
Well, not for his sake. He can wait a little bit longer.
All right, man, that wraps it up. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining us.